Drug addiction has been on the rise worldwide, and the abuse of drugs has been a problem as old as recorded human history. However, there is a lack of awareness about what drug addiction entails, how it operates, and the potential consequences of drug use. According to Johns Hopkins Medicine, drug addiction, also known as substance abuse disorder, refers to the pattern of using a drug that leads to significant problems or distress. This destructive behavior can involve damaging friendships, hurting family, losing jobs, and some drug users may suffer a drug overdose due to drug-drug interactions, unexpected intolerance to that drug, or taking unknown substances at unknown doses. It's also possible that a user might just want to take so much of this drug that they end up causing an overdose. This is typically what you think of when you hear the term overdose, but most of the time when people overdose, it's because they don't actually know the potency of the drug that they're taking. The impact of addiction is closely tied to the intricate inner workings of the human brain. As the most intricate organ in the human body, the brain is composed of various regions and components responsible for essential functions vital for survival, including memory, emotion regulation, motor control, visual processing, respiratory regulation, temperature regulation, and managing hunger and satiety. The brain utilizes specialized cells known as neurons to transmit signals across the body to interpret and respond to external stimuli. These neurons release chemical messengers called neurotransmitters to facilitate signal propagation. Certain neurotransmitters, such as glutamate, have excitatory effects, while others, such as GABA, have inhibitory effects. Despite their functional differences, all neurotransmitters share the common objective of conveying signals to ensure the body's appropriate responses. Drugs may affect the way that neurons send, receive, and process signals via these neurotransmitters. Some drugs, such as heroin and cannabis, have chemical structures akin to natural neurotransmitters and will mimic their effects in the body. Other drugs, such as cocaine or amphetamines, will cause the neuron to release many neurotransmitters or prevent the recycling of neurotransmitters, causing improper communication. The critical pathway for addiction is the reward pathway, also called the mesolimbic pathway. In this pathway, the neurotransmitter dopamine is synthesized in the ventral tegmental area and is released onto cells in the nucleus accumbens. The brain's reward system plays a crucial role in reinforcing healthy behaviors. When you engage in activities like eating food, exercising, and connecting with loved ones, your brain releases dopamine, a neurotransmitter associated with pleasure and motivation. This release of dopamine creates a positive feeling, encouraging you to repeat these healthy behaviors. However, addiction can occur when certain activities or substances hijack the brain's reward system, leading to an overstimulation of dopamine release. Over time, this excessive dopamine release can desensitize the brain's dopamine receptors, resulting in a diminished response to natural rewards and an increased drive to seek out addictive behavior or substances. This is often referred to as reward sensitization. Your brain tends to be sensitized to a specific type of incentive or reward. It's important to understand that addiction is distinct from related concepts, such as tolerance and dependence. Tolerance develops when a person uses a substance for an extended period of time. This leads the body to require increasing amounts of the substance to achieve the desired effect. Dependence, however, occurs when an individual feels unable to function normally without the drug, whether it's due to physical or psychological reasons. Addiction, on the other hand, involves compulsive drug-seeking behavior and loss of control over drug use despite the negative consequences. Addiction is not always straightforward. Not everyone will see the same distinctions between when drug use is necessary for coping, a beneficial treatment option, or when it becomes substance abuse. However, some drugs undeniably have the potential to change a person's life after just one use, drastically. I also want to highlight that different drugs will be more addictive for some people than for others. If you give 100 people each 100 drugs, each of those people will find one drug that they like more than the other 99. You don't need to know anything about those drugs. You don't need to know anything about those people, but you can be confident that there will be one or two of those compounds that is more addicting to each person than the remainder of them. In this video, we will definitively explore the most addictive drugs, thoroughly understand what makes them so powerful, and delve into the science behind their effects. We will start with prescription opioids, also known as painkillers. Opioids are a class of drugs that derive from or mimic natural substances found in the opium plant, called Papaver somniferum, or the poppy plant. Morphine is one such chemical that is found naturally in opium. It is a benzyl isoquinoline alkaloid with 2 additional ring closures. It's also technically a phenethylamine, believe it or not. All opiates have a similar function in treating acute or chronic pain. As opposed to opioids, opiates are derived from morphine and are measured in morphine milligram equivalents, MME, where each opiate is given a conversion factor based on the amount of morphine that it is equivalent to. For example, oxycodone has an MME conversion factor of 1.5, so 1 milligram of oxycodone is equivalent to 1.5 milligrams of morphine. The conversion factor changes depending on how the opiate is administered. Opiates work in the body by binding to opiate receptors, such as the mu-opioid receptor, found in the central and peripheral nervous systems, along with the GI tract. Different opioids will have different effects on these receptors. For example, methadone, oxycodone, and morphine act as full agonists, while others such as naltrexone act as antagonists. While all prescription opiates have a similar purpose in pain relief, they often act on the body for differing periods of time. For example, oxycodone has a half-life of around 3 to 5 hours, providing short-term pain relief. Methadone, on the other hand, has a half-life of around 24 hours, providing longer-term pain relief. This is also why methadone is often used to treat opioid addiction. According to the CDC, synthetic opioids like fentanyl are the primary driver of overdose deaths in the United States. During the period between January 31, 2020 to January 31, 2021, overdose deaths involving opioids rose 38.1%. It's important to recognize that prescription opioids play a crucial role in providing necessary pain relief and enabling daily function. While their medical use for pain relief is essential, it's also important to be mindful of their potential for abuse and the risk of developing a high level of addiction with repeated use. The next drug we'll be discussing is heroin, also called diacetylmorphine and diamorphine. It is an opioid substance also synthesized from the dried latex of the opium poppy. Both prescription opioids and heroin provide similar effects. However, prescription opioids are more expensive and are fast-acting. In contrast, heroin is often cheap and, unfortunately, easier to access. Heroin often comes in different forms, the most recognizable being black tar heroin, where the crude processing leaves behind impurities resulting in a black, coal-like appearance. Like its prescription counterparts, heroin is highly addictive. However, it is illegal in most countries, and in the United States is considered a Schedule I controlled substance, meaning that it has no accepted medical use and has a high potential for abuse. In other countries, heroin is used medically to relieve pain, such as during childbirth or for opioid replacement therapy. The next drug is fentanyl. Fentanyl is a synthetic piperidine opioid primarily used as an analgesic. Unlike other opioids, fentanyl is unique as it is 20 to 40 times more potent than heroin and 100 times more potent than morphine. Due to its potency, it is often used for pain relief after surgery and is used to treat chronic pain for those with opioid tolerance. However, because it is highly potent, the risk for accidental overdose is great. For instance, the lethal dose of heroin is 30 milligrams, while the lethal dose for fentanyl is 3 milligrams. Fentanyl is also unique in that it is playing a major role in the current opioid epidemic, as it is produced illicitly and is often mixed with other drugs like heroin or cocaine to increase the euphoria felt by those drugs. It can also be cut with other drugs, which oftentimes lead to overdoses. According to a recent report from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, more than 52,000 people died of drug overdoses in 2015, more than triple the number from 1999. That rapid increase is being driven by heroin and synthetic opioids, mainly fentanyl. I know that there has been some people using dope in my area. Dope is a term commonly used to refer to opioids, but sometimes people mean other drugs when they say dope. Some people using dope aren't even aware of what the chemical is, what the structure is, and you can be pretty sure that they won't be confident what the dose is, or what their tolerance is. So what can happen is sometimes local drug users that I've seen in my area end up completely passing out on the ground. I worry a lot about these people, and one day I was on a walk, and I found a woman who was laying on the ground, with her face on the ground. And another person might just walk by and think, this person's just a drug user, they don't need any help. But I felt really sorry for this woman, and I said to her, I don't want to leave you there. A person shouldn't leave another person with their face on the ground. And at first she didn't respond, but after being persistent, I ended up having the opportunity to talk to her, and she told me that the local dope that she had been purchasing must have been laced with something like a tranquilizer. When she was a kid, her father got her addicted to heroin at a young age. So suddenly, this isn't a situation where somebody's choosing to use dope. This is a situation where somebody was born out of a traumatic experience, and what this person actually needs is empathy. Oftentimes, drug use situations are more complicated than you're aware of, and it's important to keep that in mind. I'm sorry if that upset anyone, but I think it's an appropriate topic of discussion, and it's important to consider where people are coming from. Now, continuing with the rest of the video. The next drug we'll be discussing is cocaine. Cocaine is a tropane alkaloid that acts as a central nervous system stimulant. It is primarily obtained from the coca plant, native to South America, specifically Erythoxylum coca and Erythoxylum novogranitans. Cocaine stimulates the mesolimbic pathway and can cross the blood-brain barrier via proton-coupled organic cation antiporter. You may not be aware that cocaine was actually originally included in Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola was originally a medicinal beverage, but it was so popular that they began selling it to anyone who wanted to buy it, because apparently that's what companies do. They don't put cocaine in Coca-Cola anymore, but there are a couple of other addictive things that are still present in there. Cocaine stimulates the mesolimbic pathway and can cross the blood-brain barrier via a proton-coupled organic cation antiporter. To exert its effects, cocaine blocks the dopamine transporter, inhibiting the reuptake of dopamine from the synaptic cleft into the presynaptic axon terminal. This causes higher dopamine levels in the synaptic cleft and increases dopamine receptor activation in the postsynaptic neuron, causing euphoria and arousal. Cocaine also blocks the serotonin transporter and norepinephrine transporter, inhibiting the reuptake of serotonin and norepinephrine, causing the mental and physical effects of cocaine exposure. Some of the side effects of cocaine include an elevated heart rate, dilated pupils, and high blood pressure or high body temperature at high doses. Cocaine also has numbing and vasoconstriction properties and is sometimes used occasionally during the surgery of the throat or inside the nose. Even though coca leaves have been chewed historically by some cultures, in 2017, the Global Burden of Disease study found that cocaine use caused around 7,300 deaths annually. The use of cocaine continues to get worse as it is often mixed with fentanyl, which is a major contributor to rising drug overdose death, according to the NIDA, which is a subcommittee of the NIH. If you're packing a Zyn right now, spit it out. That's a command. Nicotine. Nicotine is a naturally produced alkaloid in the nightshade family of plants, primarily tobacco. It is one of the most widely used and addictive substances in the world, primarily consumed through smoking, such as cigarettes and cigars, vaping, and chewing tobacco. You heard it here first. It is indeed a sin to Zyn. It's the primary psychoactive ingredient in tobacco products and is responsible for smoking addiction. Nicotine binds to nicotinic acetylcholine receptors in the central nervous system, where it elicits its psychoactive effects. It has a higher affinity for nicotinic receptors in the brain than those in skeletal muscles. When nicotine activates nicotinic receptors on neurons in the ventral tegmental area and the mesolimbic pathway, this causes the release of dopamine. It's also able to modulate the firing rate of ventral tegmental area neurons, which are largely responsible for reinforcing the effects of nicotine. Compared to most drugs, nicotine is a bit unusual, as with increasing dosages, its profile changes from stimulant to sedative. At high doses, nicotine dampens neuronal activity. This paradoxical behavior of nicotine was first described in 1969, called Nesbitt's paradox. Another major concern with nicotine use is that if you're hanging around people who are used to using nicotine, maybe they're just playing a game and they're whipping out their vape, you're going to be a lot more tempted to use that than if you were spending time with people who aren't actively using nicotine. So the set and setting is important to consider. It's a lot harder to quit when everybody around you is also using nicotine. And even if you're not actively using, hanging out with people who are using nicotine now is a surefire way to be tempted to use nicotine once again. If you didn't know that I live in Canada, I do, and I recently crossed the border to the States, and I literally got a Zyn ad on a gas station pump. What are you guys doing in America? Aren't you guys worried that kids will see that? Oh, say, can you see this Zyn ad for me? Bow, wow, bow, bow, wow, bow, wow, pop up. Yo, Mr. White, what's cooking? Knowledge, Jesse, knowledge. Methamphetamine is a potent central nervous system stimulant, mainly used recreationally, and less commonly as a second-line treatment for ADHD and obesity. Methamphetamine is one drug in the class known as amphetamines, which are central nervous system stimulants used to treat ADHD, narcolepsy, and obesity. Methamphetamine exists as two enantiomers, levomethamphetamine, which just means it rotates light to the left, and dextromethamphetamine, which just means that it rotates light to the right, aka clockwise. Levo to the left, dextro to the right. Meth that is used recreationally refers to the racemic mixture of these two enantiomers in their pure amine forms. The hydrochloride salt of meth, however, is called crystal meth. Methamphetamine is directly neurotoxic to dopaminergic neurons. Processes that contribute to this neurotoxicity include oxidative stress, p53 activation, protein nitration, and endoplasmic reticulum stress. In addition, it has also been found that high dosages of meth can be neurotoxic to serotonergic neurons and is also associated with a higher risk of Parkinson's disease. Closely related to meth are a class of drugs called amphetamines, which are central nervous system stimulants used to treat ADHD, narcolepsy, and obesity, as I mentioned earlier. Some commonly used amphetamines include Adderall, Ritalin, Vyvanse, and Dexedrine. Despite their medical use, people also use them to enhance athletic performance and for some cognitive enhancement. In terms of chemical structure, amphetamine is just meth without one of the carbons, without the CH3 group. So instead we have an NH, instead of an NCH3. Amphetamines have a tendency to increase monoamine and excitatory neurotransmission in the brain. In addition to targeting dopamine, it also targets norepinephrine neurotransmitter systems. The most common group to misuse amphetamines is students. In a 2021 study, it was found that nearly 13% of US college students use amphetamines to improve academic performance. However, it's also important to remember that health coverage in America isn't the same as it is across the rest of the world. So this might also be due to lack of access to prescriptions through typical mechanisms. But that's just my speculation. Another chemical similar to amphetamine is MDMA, also known as ecstasy or Molly, but sometimes these specific names can refer to specific things depending on what they're cut with. MDMA is a potent empathogen and tactogen with stimulant and minor psychedelic properties. The full name of this drug is 3,4-methylene dioxymethamphetamine, MDMA. It is structurally similar to methamphetamine and mescaline. Does this drug have any uses? Well, it has been used in various studies to treat PTSD along with social anxiety in autism spectrum disorder in combination with psychotherapy. MDMA acts on the brain by increasing the release of dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine. MDMA has also been found to interact with drugs that inhibit cytochrome P450 enzymes like ritonavir. As described earlier, MDMA is an empathogenic drug, meaning that it produces a feeling of empathy. This might be because it's a serotonin-releasing drug. In a study in 2014, high doses of MDMA were found to increase psychophysiological responses to happy expressions and increased perceptions of empathy. Regardless of these effects, MDMA is highly addictive and dangerous, as side effects include hallucinations, nausea, anxiety or panic attacks, and psychosis. Plus, if this drug hasn't been tested, you don't even know if it is MDMA, or if it's cut with anything you don't want to be exposing yourself to. Since MDMA and related amphetamines also target the serotonin system, it's possible to get something called serotonin syndrome, which can be a life-threatening condition. With repeated use of MDMA, the main concern, aside from addiction potential, is 5-HT2B agonism, as there's some serotonin activity to MDMA. We have a serotonin receptor in our heart valve, 5-HT2B, serotonin 2B receptor, and what can happen with repeated MDMA use is this will lead to heart valve calcification and can require open heart surgery, where your heart valve would need to be replaced with a new one, such as one from a pig. So if you don't want to have open heart surgery and get your heart valve replaced with a pig heart valve, don't regularly use MDMA, but it might even be a better idea never to use it at all. If you don't want to have a piece of pig inside of your heart, you probably shouldn't have a piece of MDMA inside your mouth. The next drug that we have is alcohol. Alcohol is one of the most widely used and abused addictive substances in the world. In the United States alone, 1 in every 12 adults suffers from alcohol abuse or dependence. While alcohol in the context of chemistry refers to a specific class of compounds containing a hydroxyl group, alcohol in this context refers to beverages that contain ethanol, CH3CH2OH. According to the World Health Organization, alcohol is a depressant and is classified as a toxic, psychoactive, dependence-producing, and carcinogenic substance. It works by increasing the level of the neurotransmitter GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid, the major inhibitory neurotransmitter in the brain. Through this, central nervous system activity is suppressed. When alcohol is consumed, it is metabolized in the liver. A specific enzyme in our body known as alcohol dehydrogenase converts it into acetaldehyde, a toxic chemical in the body that is the primary cause of hangovers. But there are some other studies that contest this. Some people think it's actually the acetate that causes the hangover. Acetaldehyde does not remain in the body for long. It is metabolized into acetate via the enzyme aldehyde dehydrogenase. This less toxic chemical is then broken down into carbon dioxide and water in the body. The next class of substances is benzodiazepines. These depressant drugs possess a chemical structure which is a fusion of a benzene and a diazepine. No, really. These drugs are prescribed to treat anxiety disorders. Some well-known benzodiazepines include alprazolam, Xanax, diazepam, Valium, clonazepam, Klonopin, and lorazepam, Ativan. Benzodiazepines are considered less toxic than barbiturates, depressant drugs derived from barbituric acid. You might be surprised to hear that benzodiazepines are considered less toxic than barbiturates, depressant drugs derived from barbituric acid. Despite this, caution should be taken when taking these drugs. As mentioned before, benzodiazepines are depressants. This means that they will enhance the effect of the neurotransmitter GABA at the GABA-A receptor, resulting in sedative, hypnotic, anti-anxiety, anticonvulsant, and muscle-relaxing properties. High doses of benzos may cause dissociation or anterograde amnesia. In the case of an overdose, benzos can cause dangerous deep unconsciousness. When combined with other depressants such as alcohol or opioids, toxicity and the risk of fatal overdose increases significantly. Benzodiazepines have a really bad reputation for people getting dependent on them, so have a really long conversation with your doctor before you start taking these. And if you think you need a second opinion, don't hesitate to get one. A TikToker inhaled from a whipped cream can. This is what happened to his brain. Nitrous oxide, also known as laughing gas, is an inorganic compound with the chemical formula N2O. It is a colorless, non-flammable gas with a slightly sweet scent and taste. Nitrous oxide is very significant in medicine, especially surgery and dentistry, for its use as an anesthetic. Its mechanism of action in the body is not well understood. However, it has been found to interact with ligand-gated ion channels. It's also been found to moderately block the NMDA receptor and has been shown to weakly inhibit the 5-HT3 receptors, which mediate neuronal depolarization and excitation. As mentioned before, due to its use as an anesthetic, nitrous oxide has analgesic effects, which are linked to the endogenous opioid system. For example, when animals are given morphine chronically, they develop a tolerance to its effects. At the same time, animals were also tolerant to nitrous oxide as well. This is a pretty interesting study that I was interested to hear the results from. Despite these effects, nitrous oxide is also used recreationally for the euphoric high that it produces. These are referred to as whippets, coming from using whipped cream chargers that contain nitrous oxide. Recently, there's been a company called Galaxy Gas who's been selling these absolutely gigantic containers of flavored nitrous oxide that were even being sold at Costco at one point. Kids were taking these to school and sharing them with their friends, and it's an extremely reckless thing for parents to be doing. Even if the intended use of these containers is in making whipped cream, a typical can of whipped cream that you'd get pre-filled from the store will have like 3 charges of whipped cream in it. But when you start getting to the Galaxy Gas ones, we start talking like 50,000 charges of whipped cream in it, which is no longer a reasonable amount of whipped cream. How much whipped cream are you making? What are you putting whipped cream on? What am I missing out on? Where are all of you putting your whipped cream? Because I clearly could not use 50,000 doses of whipped cream on my food. Some companies, such as Galaxy Gas, market flavored chargers for culinary use. However, these cans are gigantic, have a lot of doses in them, and they can be easily misused. Nitrous oxide will reduce the amount of oxygen reaching the brain, leading to feeling lightheaded and dizzy. Repeated use of nitrous oxide can lead to oxygen deprivation, which can cause brain damage. And this can also be fatal. Chronic users of whippets will also develop a vitamin B12 deficiency. So it's very unwise to use this compound recreationally, and it's even more irresponsible to abuse it and use it over and over again. So if you have any intention to use this drug, you shouldn't, and if you do, you will develop a vitamin B12 deficiency in all likelihood, and if you have any underlying B12 deficiencies, it's an even worse idea for you to use this. So what have we learned in this video? In this video, we've learned about how addiction works, we've learned about some of the most addictive drugs, and their effects on the body. As I mentioned earlier, addiction is complex, and the drugs that we mention here are only part of that story. Addiction may seem daunting to recover from, but it's not impossible. Understanding the risks of taking these drugs is the first step in addressing the issue. If you or someone you know is struggling, remember that help is always available. Recovery from addiction is a journey, and it's never too late to start. Just because somebody fails to get clean from an addiction doesn't mean that they're a failure. Oftentimes relapses will happen, and it may take a while to fully kick a drug habit. If you know someone trying to get through this, give them hope and encourage them. And if you're going through that, I genuinely hope for the best for you. Thanks for watching, and I hope you have a great day.